Hi, and welcome back to the HE Enable podcast. This is the show all about sharing our experiences of disability, neurodivergence, and long-term health conditions in the British higher education system. I'm Cath, and this week I am joined by Tom. Tom is an incoming PhD student at the University of York who is returning to academia after spending some time in industry. We haven't actually spoken in a bit, so I'm excited to have a good catch up with him during this episode as well. Hey Tom, how's it going?
Hey, it's going really good. Thank
Good.
you. Good to be here.
Good. Please, can you kind of just introduce yourself to the listeners and share a little bit about your background in higher education?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, I'm Tom O'Neill. I studied at York and I studied computer science with a focus in cybersecurity. I was there for 5 years all in across a placement year and an integrated master's. And then following that, I've spent a couple of years across various cybersecurity consulting roles. And more recently, I am going to be imminently returning once again to York as part of PhD study.
It's been really nice. I've had a lot of friends coming to especially coming on the show. We had Emily a couple of weeks ago, basically, who's also coming in to start their PhD, and it's just great to have all these people starting new things. So, next question. If you are comfortable saying, how did your disability kind of impact your experience of higher education?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I'm a type 1 diabetic is my primary experience of disability. That's been about 10 years now since I was diagnosed. So that was a pre-university thing for me, which I think is about as average as it gets, really. I came into university with that in mind, although the way that I've managed that condition, I think, has changed a lot over even just my time at university. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a little while. I think I also suspect that I'm probably have some variety of neurodivergence, but I'm going to avoid labeling it on the basis of me not necessarily knowing exactly what that means. But what I can say is that my experience of that is a lot of the kind of challenges with activation energy in terms of kind of getting started on tasks. But then also once I've started, almost getting so deep into it that you kind of blink and it's like, oh, I don't know what I was doing. And you've kind of gone off on a tangent for very kind of extended focus periods. So I think that kind of almost too like on and off very intensely has been one of the other things that I've experienced a little bit.
Yeah, that potential neurodivergent stuff sounds eerily familiar. Let me know if you want to chat after the show. We'll have a catch up about it and give you some resources. Right. So next question, kind of like at the start of your degree or in general, what was your experience like kind of accessing higher education from a disability standpoint?
Well, for me, it was a condition I was already familiar with managing, and I had good support from a team at the local hospital to where I grew up. And as a result of that, I came in very much with a fairly clear plan of what was going to be involved in managing that. So the nurse whose care I was under at the time wrote a letter that kind of formalized, this is what Tom's symptoms are like, this is what it means, these are the sorts of accommodations that might be useful. And that was a very helpful kind of baseline. And then I pretty immediately engaged with the disability services team at York, and they were really good, actually. I'm reminded of thinking back now when I did things like A levels, managing being diabetic was quite weird because I had all of the kind of electronic equipment for dealing with managing my condition, but I had to kind of deal with the regulations of sitting those exams, which involved things like all the equipment was in like a clear pencil case at the front of the room, and they gave me a medical card that I had to hold up in order to get the attention of the invigilators. And then I was only allowed as much extra time as I used on doing the test, and they would literally time you and add it on at the end. And it was like really ruthless. Whereas I came to York and they went, you kind of, you've almost got like extra mental load involved with dealing with this. So we're just going to give you 25% extra time across the board. And you're not going to have to justify how much of it you've used and whether or not it's the right thing. So I found York relatively permissive in terms of how they approached enabling me to do that. I was also given like a smaller exam room when I had in-person exams as well, which I think was more manageable than being in one of the bigger rooms. So I found York was actually very good for enabling me to do that. And being already familiar with the sorts of accommodations that might be useful. So I found accessing higher ed actually quite easy from that perspective. It was almost like there was a clear path for what would be involved.
That's really interesting. I also know, just because I know you, that you manage your levels kind of from a phone. How does that work in exam conditions?
Also, so the really interesting thing with that is that I have not yet, and perhaps won't now, I've never sat in an exam closed conditions exam since I've begun managing it in that way. I historically have used the kind of the traditional finger pricking equipment stuff. So that was a kind of specific piece of equipment that I was just allowed to use. And in fact, York was much more hands off about it in terms of they knew what the device was. I could just do it while I was in the exam room, and they weren't so concerned that I was doing anything untoward, which was good. I've actually only been using my phone to manage it for kind of about 5 years now, which means that it's like COVID onwards, which means I had a couple of in-person exams cancelled and changed format because COVID started. And then everything in my kind of third and fourth year, I, to be fair, intentionally selected options that didn't involve in-person exams, which means I've never actually quite broached that subject. I'm not imagining I will anytime soon, which is fortunate, really. I think the real answer to that is that I would probably look on my phone what the number was before I went into the room, have a fairly clear idea that like an exam is a time bounded period wherein I'm probably not going to go radically high or low, presuming I'm careful. And I'd have the finger pricking equipment as a backup. I know that there are kind of pieces of physical equipment you can use for reading the sensor in the same way that my phone does, but I don't think swapping back and forth between them is the easiest thing. So I've kind of slightly avoided that up to now, and perhaps I'd probably prefer to keep it that way. I'm not necessarily sure how I'd go about doing that now if I was coming in as a first year again.
That's kind of like a self-managed reasonable adjustment. That's quite interesting, actually. I wonder how it is for freshers now. I guess we'd need to get someone else on to chat about it. That's cool. Right. Next question. So, did you kind of encounter any obstacles during your time, obviously at York? Did you overcome them, and if so, how?
Well, I think the key challenge, and this is where I think the neurodivergence versus kind of physical disability thing maybe kind of intermingles in a way. I can't necessarily separate one from the other, but I think a big part of my kind of challenge with getting started on tasks is kind of like maybe a burnout thing as a result of almost the extra load involved in managing the condition. I think if I ever needed extensions, which I did at times on kind of open assessments, and that was an accommodation that I was given from York, I would often kind of find my justification for that would be like almost the extra kind of time and effort and kind of health issues involved in managing that condition. So it may well be that it was almost like a bit of an intermingling of like neurodivergence, meaning that there was like a challenge getting started, and maybe that was part of the reason that I wanted the extension. But the fact that I almost had that physical disability intermingling with that, and it's like, okay, well, maybe part of it is the challenge that, I had high blood sugar a couple of days, and that meant that I had a lot more tiredness, and the sorts of things that you might anticipate coming with that meant that the accommodations that I got for having a physical disability kind of slightly managed the ones for kind of neurodivergence, which I think I still think a lot about, and I'm not sure how different it would have been if I'd not had the disability I have, but I'd had the neurodivergence that I probably have. I think that's still something I'm thinking about, what that would have been like. But overall, I think as a result of the way in which I felt well accommodated for that disability, I overall managed to kind of deal with the other aspects.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, I kind of get it with the reasonable adjustments as well. Like, I have a minor physical disability, and it did mean that I actually got a lot of accommodations before I got my ADHD diagnosis. Even though that got me my actual exam adjustments. Like, I had a lot in terms of like accommodation adjustments and things like that, and I find that it does surprisingly make things easier, not least because you're already in contact with disability services.
I think a slightly related to diabetes thing. I mean, this is very kind of a niche problem, but I think it's something that I thought about. There was a period of time in the last couple of years at York where there was some concerns around particularly spiking in clubs, and as a result of that, there was a kind of a big movement from student campaigners that people were very worried about things like injecting and things like that. And actually, me trying to go into clubs with all of my diabetes equipment, that was a kind of slightly weird thing to plan through in terms of like having my kind of rehearsed explanation of why I've got like needles and things in my pockets and stuff like that. And it's like, well, I've got a completely legitimate reason to be doing this, but I don't necessarily want challenging by somebody at 11 o'clock in the evening when I've had a couple of drinks. It's not necessarily the situation you want to get into. So dealing with the fact that other people have kind of really legitimate worries about personal safety, and I've got an adjustment that I need in order to manage my safety, has kind of created a strange interaction. And I think balancing one with the other was a bit of a unique challenge to make sure that I kind of knew what it was that I was doing and why I was doing it and how to explain that to somebody if it came up.
I have never even thought about that as something that you might have to like accommodate for. That, oh, that must be tough trying to explain to like a bouncer at like 10 p.m. Like, but it's part of student life, like it is. And I guess it would have resolved itself. I guess as well, when you had your phone, you could just kind of flash it up and it would be a lot easier.
Yeah.
To like,
and actually, I found even like going through things like airports where overall you're not allowed sharps and you're not allowed liquids and all these sorts of things. Actually, now people are really familiar these days with how people manage diabetes as a condition. So often I attempt to draw their attention to the sensor attached to my arm, and straight away that means they're expecting to see needles, which means when my bag goes through the scanner, they're almost just completely ready for it. So I found in a lot of places where those sorts of security things are there, actually people know what they're looking for, and therefore I think people naturally have made it easier for me. So I've not had too bad of an experience with that.
Yay, society. That's very good news.
Yeah, surprisingly.
Yeah, honestly. Right, let's up to this next question. Were there any clubs, societies, or initiatives that made a significant positive difference to your experience of higher education? As a bonus question that I haven't written down, my apologies. Do you know if there's any you kind of want to enter as part of your PhD? Or that you want to give a go to?
It's a good question. I mean, I got very involved as a student rep, which I think was the big thing for me, and is the reason that I met you, Cath, as you know. So that is something that I've enjoyed a lot, and it's something that I'm anticipating going straight back in higher education again, which is exciting. I do enjoy it as much as there are difficulties and challenges with the kind of confrontation that comes with being a student advocate. It is something that I've got a lot of value from. And I think a lot of the kind of broader transferable skills I got out of university in general came from me having those sorts of difficult conversations with people at various different levels of the organization and dealing with things like conflicts of interest sometimes. So I remember when I was in my second year and I was a student rep, there were some concerns raised around the way in which some assessments were being adjusted to deal with COVID. And it's like, okay, this was a closed exam and now it's going to be an open exam and it's going to be different. And I had a group of students express to me that they were basically concerned the assessment wasn't going to be rigorous enough, and that them as like, high performing students were basically not going to be, there was going to be like too open, and it was basically going to be too easy of an exam, and therefore they were going to struggle to get the mark they wanted. They were worried there was going to be like scaling down and these sorts of challenges. But then on the flip side, this is a module that I found really hard, and that actually moving to an open assessment was maybe a little bit easier. So I was kind of thinking, well, I've got an interesting conflict of interest thing here, where I have a view where a student wants me to advocate for them. It might not be that I'm advocating in my own interest, and it actually might not be that I'll be advocating in the interests of the majority of the student body. And therefore, you have to think ideologically, okay, which one of these is what's the right way of approaching something where a minority of people have got a really interesting point, but I kind of have to reflect what would be the best for the majority of people are represented. So I think all that sort of like conflict resolution, thinking about how to weigh up those sorts of kind of ethical questions has actually helped me a lot going into work as well. And I think will help me again thinking about things like research ethics and things like that. So it's certainly, that's the really, really big one.
Yeah. No, I really enjoyed actually working with you as a rep. We were in different faculties, and then you were like in a department and I was like arts and humanities for like 9 departments. But like we'd still see each other every couple weeks, and it was a good time. But yeah, there'd always be interesting stuff. I think at that point you kind of have to go to democratic process, and it can drag out a little bit, especially in COVID where stuff kind of changed pretty quickly. Yeah, that's a doozy. I never knew about that one. So you're going to be doing that again, right? I guess it's a bit different. So for those of you who aren't at York, which I'd like to diversify, I hope it's not everyone, they've recently kind of massively shifted how the Students' Union operates. How do you think that's do you think that's really going to play a role in how you come back as a rep, or?
I think so. Well, the really interesting context at York is that for a historical reason that I'm not sure anybody can quite explain anymore, York used to have 2 students' unions for its kind of broad student body and then a separate one for its postgraduate student body. And it's been a movement in the last kind of 12, 18 months to close the kind of postgraduate part and bring that all under one umbrella with one students' union, which means they've changed how they think about how you should do representation. And I know increasingly they're starting to move away from, for example, there being a representative for disabled students and a representative for commuting students, and for example, into more of a kind of like citizens' assemblies where it's more like direct engagement with students and things like that. So I think they're very much trialing that model, and it's very much a work in progress. So I think that's something that will make for an interesting change, and it might mean that there's a broader range of voices involved, or it might not. I think it'll remain to be seen. What I'm seeing as the kind of immediate for me is there are some openings on the more academic side. So there are some rumblings that I might have the opportunity to attend the University Senate as a kind of governing body, which will be an interesting one.
You never did Senate, did you?
No, I never ended up attending Senate.
Oh, so for those who don't know, University of York Senate is the highest academic kind of decision-making body in the university. It's chaired by the Vice-Chancellor. I attended it for 2 years as the Arts and Humanities rep. I think you'll find it quite interesting. I think one of my personal favourite moments, it has nothing to do with governance, but when Longboy the Duck went very viral, that made it to University Senate.
Right.
And hearing the Vice-Chancellor talk about this duck brought me endless joy. But I think you'll enjoy it. It had some interesting moments a few years ago.
Yeah, I think particularly as the university grapples with the challenges that the entire sector is grappling with in terms of trying to maintain standard whilst also dealing with funding cuts and these sorts of things, there are lots of difficult conversations being had. So I think being in the room while some of these happen will be interesting.
It's definitely a moment to be in. I think the last one was COVID, which is when kind of I got involved. And then they've kind of had a period of change, and now there's obviously been the cuts in the sector. I think you'll find it quite interesting, for sure. Right, let's pop on to this next question. So, have you kind of experienced any instances of your disability proving helpful in a higher education setting? This might be a bit a bit trickier to answer if you have like a physical disability. I'm not sure. Like, what do you think?
I mean, no, I've had to think about this. I mean, the clear thing for me to refer to is that the research area that I'm looking to go into is very personal in terms of my particular research area as part of the AI safety research group at York is looking a lot at how autonomous medical devices work. So as it currently stands, have a system that is more autonomous than it was some years ago. It used to be that I have a piece of equipment that I put testing strips into and I prick my fingers and you bleed onto a thing and then you look at the number and then you inject. So that's kind of pretty manual. And then the next scale up from that is I have a sensor attached to me that contacts my phone via Bluetooth. So I've got kind of live data, but I'm still using insulin pens to inject. A lot of people now, though, have started to go onto insulin pumps, which means there's a little bit more of what they call a hybrid closed loop, where the pump talks to the phone, talks to the pump, and it kind of passes data back and forth. And there's a little bit more of an automation going on. I have absolutely had experiences, though, where the sensor is given a radically incorrect number, and I know based on how I feel that the number is wrong, and I can go and use a different testing method to go, oh, yeah, definitely wrong. So my immediate question is, it's a safety critical system. How do we make sure that I don't get injected with a load of insulin by a pump because the sensor's given the wrong number? The really simple answer to that, looking at some of the current literature, is that people use multiple redundant sensors, and it's like, okay, we're going to have a consistency across them. But as these things get more and more autonomous, and this becomes like a fully self-managing system, which is where the medical research is definitely going, there are some real kind of safety question marks there. And that's where I'm really interested in the research. So I think the fact that I've got the particular disability I've got has obviously led me towards having a bit of an insight into, oh, what might some of the challenges be? What might be an area that I can explore that's unique and no one's really thought about before, and I can find my niche for my research. So that's part of it, the fact that I'm researching something very specific to me. But I think more generally, it has caused me to think a lot about that kind of human factors side. Okay, well, it's a computer system at the most literal sense, but actually it's a kind of physical human system as well, where I interact with it and I have opinions, and I've got used to what happens when it shows me a particular pattern, and I know maybe how far that's going to go, and I can start to come to conclusions as a kind of human in the loop, as it were, using the system. So having that particular experience of managing that disability, I think, has given me a unique view of how people interact with medical devices, and therefore I think that's likely to be of help as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me. I think the thing is that the reason I found this question a little bit different to kind of ask is obviously a lot of my guests so far have had neurodivergence, and that's been their main thing, right? Whereas, and like they can be, I can lock in, I can it changes how I see the world.
Yes.
And then sometimes if you have a physical disability, right, it's like, well, I'm just disabled, and it's just making things, it's just an extra barrier.
Yeah.
I was a bit apprehensive to ask that, but actually that's a really, really good answer. I really appreciate that. It's very insightful.
Yeah, to a certain point, it took a little bit of me having to think about it, because, yeah, intuitively, it might well be more natural to see a neurodivergence as you say, a way that you see the world, but it's a lens rather than like a strict disadvantage. It might be it comes with disadvantages, but it's just kind of different. I think most people, and perhaps this is a view of its own right, but I think most people with most physical disabilities, they may well have community that comes from that particular disability, but overall it's kind of like a strict disadvantage. So, okay, well, what is it that's different about me as a result of having that disability, I think, is something that I think about a lot. How much of the way in which I approach problems, the way in which I think about things, the way in which I understand other people's experiences has changed as a result of being a physically disabled person. And I can't separate that, so it's hard to know, but it's interesting to think about all the same.
It is, yeah. I'm glad I include this question, even though I get a range of answers. I think it's, yeah, I like that answer. What I actually want to do now is I want to just switch a couple of our questions around. So what I do want to ask is that you've got your background in cybersecurity. You spent the past couple of years doing consultancy kind of in that area, including for the government, which is just very cool. You're now going to be researching, as you mentioned, like safety for autonomous medical devices for diabetes, I'm assuming primarily kind of type 1. Was researching medical devices kind of a natural next step for you, given your background? Or was there a particular moment where you were like, oh, I really want to research this?
Well, I think the starting point for me is that I knew I wanted to research generally. I didn't know that straight away. Like coming into university, I very much was like, okay, well, I'm going to do a degree. I'm going to focus on cybersecurity. And that's the career I'm going to go into. And to a certain extent, that's kind of the path I went on to. And I've enjoyed that and I've got a lot out of it. But in my final year, I did a research methods module at York, which I really enjoyed both of the lecturers that I had for that module. And I think I got a lot out of it. And it was actually the module I did the best on in my whole degree. And I went, okay, right, this feels really natural. And it was the one where I was the person who turned up having done all the reading and had opinions on things and was like looking to debate it, because I got really into thinking about research ethics and thinking about research design and this sort of thing. So I went, oh, I guess I kind of want to do research, don't I? So with that in mind, I applied to study a PhD while I was at university as an undergrad. And the funding did not enable me to do that. There wasn't funding at the time. And I was kind of unlucky because there was more funding the year before me. There was more funding the year after me. It was almost just kind of not quite the right year for it. And so I took that for what it was. And I thought, well, if I go into kind of consulting, you get that broad range in terms of you deal with lots of different clients, lots of different contacts, and you kind of get used to particularly kind of talking to people, finding out about them. And I very much got into business analysis as getting requirements for computer systems, thinking about how they should be designed, how you should understand the people. And it's almost like a very research oriented job. So I kind of kept that particular skill set improving and warmed up. And then I saw the opportunity at York with the Saints program that's looking at AI safety. And I went, well, that's a really interesting opportunity. I wonder if there's something that I could pick that would be a good proposal for that funding call. And then I started thinking about myself as a disabled person and what it would mean to study the kinds of devices that I use. And that's where I carved that niche out a little bit. So it wasn't necessarily that medical devices research was something I thought I was going to do. When I did my proposal a couple of years ago, I was imagining I was going to do cybersecurity academic research. So the fact that I'm slightly pivoting is not necessarily what I'd planned. But what I absolutely do think is that safety uses a lot of the same skill set. Cybersecurity is very much a human discipline, I would say. There are some people who are doing the very kind of controls and like making the code secure and that sort of thing. It's never really been my area. I've never thought of myself as much of a programmer. It's something I kind of do when it's necessary. So as a result of that, I think I very much imagined that what I would do is the more kind of human research side. And then I ended up kind of into this space. And safety has that same kind of thinking about risk way of thinking about the world. Okay, well, we're in cybersecurity. We're going to think about what could go wrong. What's the impact of it? What's the kind of likelihoods? Trading that off, thinking about risks, thinking about how we can control risks, how we can kind of reduce how likely they are. And actually applying that same sort of approach to safety, which is kind of quite a pure discipline in some respects. Kind of, it's not quite solved, but like we've got 40, 50 years of things like, the rail accident board and like air crashes and things where people think about safety. And actually those accidents are very, very rare. And we got very rigorous in that space. So almost taking safety as a very kind of well-defined discipline and then going, okay, well, what's the emerging area? Well, we've got AI. Okay, well, we're going to have more autonomous systems. What does that mean? How's that going to change? And applying that cybersecurity, what can go wrong, thinking about risks mindset, I think is a natural step, even though it's a bit of a pivot from the cybersecurity space that I have been in until now.
Yeah, and I guess regardless, it still complements your skill sets very well. Just kind of given your background, do you think there's going to be any extra content you need to learn, or is it just pretty much a straight pivot?
Well, it's actually quite unique because I'm going into a centre for doctoral training. It starts with a very taught component in terms of they're not credit bearing modules, but there's going to be like, I'm taught over a few weeks and then there's a bit of an assessment, and that's anticipated to cover the more kind of programming side, AI model training stuff. It's going to cover the safety stuff, which is very much York's specialism, but it's also going to cover like law and ethics and things like that, which is an interest, but not something I've done as a student, really. It's not something that I've like studied ethical ideas and I've not really studied the law with any level of formality. So like those are going to be new and different. And there's like all sorts of weird challenges that you'd never think of. So things like I'm flying drones offshore and it's outside of like the 3 mile boundary, which means it's international waters. What happens if the drone crashes and we have to deal with the laws of salvage and things like that, which is like a bizarre question that I would never have thought of without a lawyer kind of saying, oh, have you thought about that? So I think I'm open to the fact that there's going to be some learning involved that's very much kind of more taught program style learning, getting headlong into something which is a bit of a pivot. But then I think coming into it with the very kind of safety, security way of thinking about things that I've already built up. So there's going to be some stuff that's new, but it's going to be building on what I think I've already been doing.
Yeah, because a lot of that, actually thinking about it, is going to be on the basis of like edge cases as well. It sounds, especially during the training component. Like, do you think you'll have to do a lot of edge case work in your PhD research itself? So it's going to be like, oh, you know, that very rare time the levels like spike and stuff like that. Or do you think a lot of it's going to be just like system mechanisms and like general functioning?
I think the area that I'm most interested in is very much that thinking about how people will deal with edge cases. So most of the time, if its system is just sort of managing itself, you're not really managing the system very much. It's just doing what it's doing. What I'm interested in particular, is the fact that, and this isn't a tightly defined research area yet. That's something that's going to probably build over the next 6 months as I get settled properly. But the area that I see as a kind of open question a little bit is the fact that I, at the moment, have a kind of very much awareness physically of how I feel. And I think part of that is because I'm actively managing being a type 1 diabetic. So if I feel high blood sugar, I can feel some physical symptoms. I can look at the number and I go, oh yeah, that's high blood sugar. And you start to build associations between how you feel in yourself and what it's actually like in terms of the kind of the cold maths of that's what the number is. So I've got that kind of feeling that I've built up. If I had a completely automated system running itself for 6 months, and then I have one edge case in 6 months, I'm not sure that I would feel that prepared to deal with it anymore, because I've almost not been like an active manager of that system that's my health anymore. So I think there are some interesting questions there of how prepared is the average patient going to feel to deal with the once a year problem, or even the once every 5 years problem, without it being an immediate I have to go to A&E now kind of problem. And is there a role that, like, AI explainability in terms of, can the system tell you what was going wrong or what was going right before it went wrong so that you can make good decisions? I don't know the answer to any of these questions yet, but I think that's part of the fun of going into PhD study. I've got a bunch of questions I don't know the answer to, and maybe no one knows the answer to, and I'll just have a think and try stuff and see if any ideas come out of it and if any answers come out of any of it.
You're muddling your way through with kind of papers and logic behind you. I think that's mostly just academic research.
Yeah, I think so.
That's really interesting. I would love to actually chat to you more about that as your PhD develops. So I will be messaging you every few months, going like, "Hey, how's it going yet? Have you solved it?" Right, let's pop to this next question. Obviously, you kind of mentioned that a lot of your stuff during university was kind of managed in regards to your diabetes. Even with that in mind, kind of, is there anything you wish you'd known about university before starting?
I've thought about this quite a bit. I think the challenge is that, with the benefit of hindsight, I think there's kind of all sorts of things about how I work best and like what my priorities might want to be, like the kind of the more practicality of being a student and working, that I think would have been really useful to go in with. I think partially, if I look back at the person I was at 17, 18, I think I was about as prepared as I probably could have been. I think it's a difficult one to separate, because I arrived and university is always going to kind of be new and different. And to me, I think the main thing I got out of my time as an undergraduate is I kind of found out things about myself that I didn't know. So I couldn't necessarily pass that, if I could pass that information to my past self and you could go into it again, then yeah, I'd probably do some things differently. I think that's absolutely the case. But based on what I kind of could reasonably have known about the literal practicality of being a student and what happens, I think I think I had a reasonably good job. I think I knew what it was about, and I think I adapted to it reasonably well. So that was all right, particularly because, as we've said, I had the kind of managing my disability side of it pretty well planned before I arrived, even down to things like I had a like a little fridge in my room to keep my insulin in, because it was like, oh, but what if, like, people come home drunk at 3 a.m. and they like move your stuff out of the fridge by accident, and then it's like, oh gosh, now I have to go and get more medication because it's like gone off. That even to that level, they were like, oh yeah, cool, you can have like a little tiny fridge in your room that you can put your medication in. So I arrived, and it's like, yeah, okay, I know who the people I need to talk to are, I know what the kind of accommodations I need are, and I kind of got it, and it was all right. So I suppose that's a long-winded way of saying maybe not really. I think I was about as prepared as I could have been.
Yeah, maybe the message is that it's all in the preparation.
Yeah, if you prepare,
but you already knew that.
If you prepare the stuff that you know you can prepare for, then like that's great. And talk to people and ask questions and find out what it is that people can do to help you, and ask for the support. And hopefully the funding for that support will still be there in the circumstances. But in terms of the stuff that I now kind of wish I'd known, in terms of, okay, well, what would make doing the study easier, I think I had to learn that as I went, and I think you have to muddle through it a little bit.
Yeah, no, I get that. Out of curiosity, did you have to provide your own fridge, or did they just give you one?
No, I provided one, actually. I think they probably would have been a bit nervous about, it being the right spec or the right whatever. So no, they didn't. So that is an interesting question. But I would have thought that probably would have been something that I would have been able to get through DSA. I'm not sure. It's an interesting question. I never ended up applying for DSA, because basically everything that I need to manage my condition is NHS provided, fortunately, in the UK, which means that I was like, okay, well, in terms of things being purchased for me to enable me, I kind of don't need anything. So I didn't end up applying. Had I have been in a financial position where I couldn't afford to have a fridge in my room, but I could have done with one, I might hope that would have been something that would have been paid for. But it's an interesting question I don't know the answer to.
To be honest, though, like saying you didn't apply for DSA, I did before I was diagnosed with any neurodivergence. And it actually really surprised me how much you can get that isn't directly related to your condition. Like, I was like, hey, I have this. Sometimes I get moderately fatigued. And they were like, oh, do you want the screen reader software? So it's like easier for you to do stuff. It's really interesting, kind of the logic behind what they actually grant for disabled students allowance. Which you might not have realised, but it was quite interesting.
I suspect at the time I was perhaps a bit stubborn, and I think I had the feeling of, I don't want to have to explain to somebody what my life's like. I kind of just want to go and work it out. And maybe that was unwise with the benefit of hindsight, but I kind of worked it out. I would probably always encourage people to go ahead and look now to see what's possible and what's available to them, but I didn't, and I think that might have been because of my own hang-ups about what would have been involved.
Yeah, I mean, and also, like, some of the stuff you don't even realize is kind of available to you. Like, I think I got a small accommodation adjustment for, like, my rent prices, because I needed an ensuite, and they were like, we can provide that for shared bathroom price. Originally, I thought I was being quite cheeky, and it turns out that was just a reasonable adjustment.
Wow.
That I actually got. I managed to leverage that to get rent discounts in my masters as well, to get my ensuite cheaper.
I suspect I probably got my first choice accommodation at York because I applied as a disabled student, because I think, well, it was in the letter that I got from my clinician that it would be wise for me to have an ensuite room because of just a lot of the challenges around diabetes and kind of like keeping well and not getting germs from other people and stuff like that. So it was suggested in that letter that I have an ensuite room, and I suspect probably just for ease, they were like, oh, he can have his first choice, whatever, that's fine. So I maybe kind of just benefited outright from that. But no, I don't think I ever had anything like as far as rent prices or anything like that. So that's interesting. Maybe it depends on who assesses it and what they thought about your circumstances. I don't know, really.
I think you might just need to ask. Like, for everyone listening, if you absolutely need an ensuite, like, I didn't get my rent discount at York or my other uni, like, or Oxford, until I was like, hey, I medically require an ensuite. You know, I shouldn't be disadvantaged out of the rent rate because shared bathrooms are much cheaper. Is there anything you can do? And both times they discounted my rent. It's something I didn't even realize was a thing. So I guess people should check that.
And I suppose maybe there's a slightly perverse incentive for the universities not to be too noisy about what you could get because of the kind of challenge in almost like if everybody asks, it becomes too expensive, which I obviously is a shame, but it's worth asking, definitely.
Well, that's my job as the host. Whoops. Right, we're going to do a couple rapid fires, mate. 3 questions left. So, how and what are you doing nowadays? And how have your past experiences affected this? I know we've kind of already covered a lot of it. And also, why are you choosing to re-enter higher education on top of kind of what you mentioned earlier?
Well, re-entering higher education, really, as I've alluded to, I kind of knew it was something I wanted to do. What really happened was when I saw the funding call come out, I had a very kind of frank thought that was like, can I live with myself if I don't give this a go? It's almost like I know it's something I want to do. I know that I'm in a position that I can afford to do it in the circumstances. I was like, well, actually, if I don't do this, I just think I'll regret it. I think it's a big lesson that I've taken away from family. I've got family that have absolutely kind of told me in hindsight that, you know, like they had opportunities as a younger person that they didn't take all of them. And that's the thing they remember more. I think very few people like regret doing things. They tend to regret things they don't do. And I think there's a lot of research that points to that as well. So like I saw this is something I could do. I could re-enter higher ed. I want to give it a go. And if I know it's going to be difficult, I know it's going to be difficult in different ways, but I know it's something I want to do, so I want to give it a go. And I'll feel better about myself for knowing that I gave it a go, no matter what ends up happening out the back of it. So I think that's part of it. I've generally quite enjoyed being being someone who's kind of done the consulting stuff. Like I got the value out of doing that, but I'm now prepared to do something different, and that's perfectly fine with me as well.
Yeah, and I guess that all kind of stemmed from when you did that. Was it the research methods module?
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Right. Next question. So obviously we spend this show kind of discussing your individual experiences. But what I like to do for this question is just kind of zoom out and ask kind of how do you think we could improve the experiences of higher education as both individuals and a society?
Goodness me. I mean, we could probably make a whole episode just talking about the kind of challenges with higher education at the moment, which means
next time.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think the immediate thing is obviously there's a really big funding challenge, and a big part of that is the fact that we've got very hostile as a country towards visas. I'm approaching political views here, so I'm going to try my best not to go too near that. But roughly speaking, there is obviously more of a hostile environment, to use the government's wording, towards people coming over with kind of visas compared to people who are British, which means that that's obviously creating a lot of challenge for the higher education sector that historically relied on the kind of fee disparity between home students and international students. I absolutely think that higher education would be more accessible if there was the appropriate funding to make sure that it was. So that's the really, really big thing, that if I could wave my magic wand, fix the funding challenge, and then I think there's the right people thinking about the right ideas across higher ed, that it could be made really good. It's tough, and things have got a lot tougher over the last kind of 5 years. So that's the really big one.
Yeah, do you know what? I actually had this conversation in my last episode, and it was pretty much the same answer. And I think I said something along the lines of, it's great if you have the money, but it's also putting it in the right place, especially, I guess, in our context, disability services, right? Last question, mate. Ready?
Yeah.
So, if we were to kind of take your entire story and we were to condense it down into like one kind of moment, what's one key takeaway that you would like listeners to remember from your story?
I think based on the conversation I wasn't sure what I was going to say about for this, but based on the conversation we've had, I think my really big takeaway is ask for what you think you need. I think every kind of accommodation I've got that's made me able to succeed has been as a result of the fact that I was just a tiny little bit cheeky and I went, hey, I kind of just need this thing. And most of the time people are like, yeah, that sounds all right. And I've found everywhere I've gone in the workplace and in higher education as well, when I've said, actually, I kind of need this thing, people have been really, really willing to do it. And everybody that I've said, oh, I'm a diabetic, I need to kind of, I need to step out and do this thing, or this is the challenge I'm having, or even a couple of times I've woken up and I've had like slightly dodgy blood sugar and I've gone, you're going to have to excuse me from this meeting because I just feel really terrible. Asking, because it's a slightly biblical idea, kind of asking you shall kind of receive, as it were. And I kind of slightly believe that, ideologically speaking, in terms of, okay, well, that's the takeaway I think I'd like. If you don't ask, you're very, very unlikely to have someone almost realize that you need the help, but there's nothing wrong with asking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a difference, like a lot of self-advocacy can get very tiring. And I appreciate that. But then I also think there's kind of a level of transparency which does make things easier and I feel like is a lot less taxing. Like, again, like if I ask for a quiet space or like just a moment to re-regulate, people are normally quite good. And it's not quite the same as kind of having to fight for adjustments.
No, and I don't think you always have to explain why it is that you're asking for something. I mean, some people are not always going to have your best interests at heart. And I've definitely had difficult conversations with people where I've needed to stand my ground. So self-advocacy is challenging, and that's probably not going to go away anytime soon. But most people that I have found myself associating with have just been reasonable people. And if I've said I wanted something, I don't think I felt I had to advocate as much as just kind of be transparent, as you say, just say, this is kind of what I need. And I've tended to find that that's been okay.
That's good. Right. Tom, we made it to the end of the questions, mate. Wonderful. So I'm going to do my little closing bit and then we will have a wonderful chat after the show. So the HE Enable podcast is a show all about sharing our experiences of disability, neurodivergence and long-term health conditions in the British higher education system. I am always looking for people to share their stories, like Tom, like everyone I've had in the past few weeks. If that's something you'd be interested in, then please feel free to reach out at henenabled@gmail.com. The email's also in the description of this show. Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a really good conversation.
Cheers. Yeah, definitely.